There's a question a lot of women have asked themselves, alone, in the dark of the bedroom, after one more disappointment. Why doesn't he just grow up? Why, after 30, 40 years of life, does it still feel like she's dealing with a confused teenager instead of a whole man? And the answer psychology offers is uncomfortable because it doesn't point to malice or to a lack of love. It points to something quieter and harder to see. There's a type of man who never had, inside himself, the experience of actually needing to grow up. He was spared that his entire life. And what looks, at first glance, like luck, is actually a sentence. Because a man who never had to figure things out on his own, never had to carry the weight of his own choices, never had to walk through pain without someone holding his hand the whole way, arrives at adulthood with a grown body and a mind still under construction. And the worst part, he doesn't know it. He thinks he's already an adult because he has a bank account, a job, sometimes even a kid. But inside, he's still waiting for someone to show up and fix what, in reality, should already be his to fix on his own. And today, I want to show you calmly why this happens, what keeps this pattern alive, and why, most of the time, the one who suffers most from it isn't even him. It's whoever is standing next to him. There's an interesting phenomenon developmental psychology calls prolonged infantilization. It's not a disease, it's not some isolated clinical diagnosis, it's a pattern of upbringing that repeats itself generation after generation, almost always with good intentions. A mother who solves everything for her son, not because she wants to smother him, but because she's afraid to watch him suffer. An absent father who never taught him what it means to carry weight, because nobody ever taught him that either. And the result is always similar, a child who grows up physically but is never truly invited to experience the feeling of making a mistake, of figuring things out, of facing the consequences of his own actions. And the brain, shaped by repetition, learns exactly what gets reinforced. If every single time he messes up, someone shows up and fixes it before he even feels the weight of the mistake, he learns, without realizing it, that mistakes don't cost anything. And that's where, quietly, the adult who never truly grew up is born. And here's a curious thing about this process. The smarter and more charming this man is, the harder it becomes to spot the problem. Because he's not the obvious stereotype, the guy lying on the couch, no job, no plan at all. Often he's competent at work, funny at parties, full of big ideas about the future. The problem doesn't show up on the surface, it shows up in whatever's supposed to hold the surface up. He starts 10 projects and finishes none of them. He talks about building something serious, but bails the exact moment it starts demanding sacrifice. He promises presence and disappears the moment the relationship stops being just fun and starts asking for structure. And little by little, whoever lives alongside him realizes there's a massive difference between the man he seems to be on a good night out and the man he actually is when life gets hard. One of the most interesting explanations comes from how this type of man handles emotional discomfort. Psychological maturity in practice is the ability to tolerate frustration without running from it. It's sitting inside the discomfort of a conflict and staying there instead of disappearing. It's listening to criticism without getting defensive the second it lands. It's waiting, delaying pleasure, sitting with boredom, without needing constant stimulation just to feel okay. And that's exactly what this man never developed, because as a kid, he never had to. Every time discomfort showed up, someone showed up too, right alongside it, to lift that weight off his shoulders before he ever learned to carry it himself. And now, as an adult, his body can handle a hard day's work, but his mind still runs from the smallest hint of emotional discomfort, as if it were a genuine life-or-death threat. And that's exactly why he avoids, all the time, any situation that requires sustained effort. A job that's too stable feels like a prison. A relationship that's too serious feels suffocating. Routine feels like a slow death. And every so often he changes the scenery, switches jobs, ends relationships right at their peak, exactly when they start asking for real depth, because deep down he confuses stability with confinement and freedom with the total absence of commitment. Except that freedom, in practice, never turns into anything built. It turns into repetition. The same cycles with different people, different years, always ending up in the same place, alone, wondering why nothing ever lasts. Another important piece of this puzzle is how this man handles guilt. Instead of feeling remorse and changing his behavior, he tends to feel shame and get defensive, and the difference between those two emotions is enormous. Remorse pushes a person toward repair. Shame pushes a person toward escape or attack. That's why, when confronted with something he did wrong, this type of man rarely responds with reflection. He responds with irritation or with playing the victim, turning whoever's trying to have the conversation into someone unfair, dramatic, or controlling. And so the conversation that could have led to growth turns into just one more dead-end argument, where nobody learns anything and the whole thing repeats itself a few weeks later. There's also a fairly common pattern in how this man chooses partners. He tends to gravitate toward extremely capable, organized women, the kind who can hold practically everything together on their own. And at first, this feels like complementarity. She handles the structure. He brings the lightness. But over time, she starts to notice she's carrying two lives at once, her own and his, while he keeps living like he's still in college, never expecting anything from himself beyond his own immediate pleasure. And that's when the relationship starts turning into exhaustion, not because the love ran out, but because carrying the weight of two people alone is a job nobody can sustain forever. There's also a very specific symptom that tends to go unnoticed: the way this man relates to time. Ask him about long-term plans, and you'll notice an almost tangible discomfort. He talks about big dreams, trips, projects, a life completely different from the one he's living now, but he can rarely explain the practical step between the present and that imagined future. Because deep down, really planning means accepting that the present is going to require sacrifice, and sacrifice is exactly the word this type of man spends his whole life avoiding. He'd rather live in an eternal "I'll get to it," because that promise, never actually held accountable, is more comfortable than real action, which always carries the risk of failure, of criticism, of exposure. And so the years go by, and the talk about the future stays exactly the same, while real life stays parked in the same place it's always been. There's also a detail that shows up in how this man treats his own body and his own health. He often puts off checkups, ignores clear signs of physical and emotional exhaustion, and treats his own well-being as something he'll deal with someday, the exact same way he treats every other adult responsibility. There's a deep refusal to admit limits, because admitting a limit would mean admitting he's not invincible, that he needs care, routine, discipline, words that sound to him almost like synonyms for prison. And so the body keeps quietly sending the bill for whatever the mind refuses to face. Now, the question that really matters is, can this actually change? And the honest answer is yes, but it takes process, not a passing burst of motivation. The first real move toward change is allowing yourself to feel discomfort without running from it at the first chance, staying inside the hard conversation, inside the tight deadline, inside the uncomfortable emotion, even with every urge to disappear. The second is learning to make mistakes without falling apart inside, understanding that failure isn't a threat to your identity, but an unavoidable part of building anything serious. The third is taking on your own, tasks that used to always get solved by someone else, even small ones, even without any desire to do them, because it's exactly that practical repetition that slowly rebuilds the capacity to hold real responsibility. And the fourth is learning to hear criticism as information, not as an attack, breathing before reacting, letting the other person's words actually land before any automatic defense kicks in. No man changes because he heard once that he needs to. He changes when he decides over and over to choose the harder path instead of the more comfortable one. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happens decision after decision until one day, without noticing exactly when, he finally becomes the man he only used to seem like. If this video made you think of someone or of yourself, write this sentence down in the comments. Growing up is a choice, not an age. And if you want to keep exploring human behavior, relationships, and psychology, consider subscribing to the channel. because we're going to keep this conversation going right here. Thanks for watching all the way through, and see you in the next video.